The consensus narrative is a kinetic one. Hypersonic missiles, carrier groups, the physics of launch. This is a deliberate, systemic misdirection. The primary vector for geopolitical extinction is no longer a mushroom cloud. It is the sound of absolute silence. While legacy media tracks warheads, the real battlefield is 3 miles beneath the Atlantic. Unseen, unprotected. Thousands of miles of fiber optic cables carrying trillions in transactions per second. The central nervous system of global finance. Cutting these is not an act of war, it is an act of systemic liquidation. The second vector is orbital. Not bombs from space, but a targeted electromagnetic pulse. States are already operationalizing these assets. South Korea has launched a $1.29 billion program for electronic warfare aircraft, designed specifically to jam and disrupt adversary networks. The objective isn't destruction, it's sensory deprivation. Satellite blinding. The result is a blind Leviathan, a global power with thousands of warheads, a dozen carrier groups, and a currency of record that cannot see its assets, cannot communicate with its forces, and cannot clear a single sovereign bond transaction. It is a military colossus rendered inert by a handful of low-cost, asymmetric attacks. The textbook motive for war is a lie. Conventional analysis views kinetic action as a projection of strength. This is a fatal misreading. A major power initiates conflict not at its peak, but when it faces a systemic solvency crisis. The war is a desperate, calculated pivot, a financial event designed to restructure a failing domestic balance sheet and externalize a political liability. It is the modern equivalent of a sovereign debt default, executed with artillery instead of spreadsheets. Examine the Russian Federation. CSS analysis frames the 2022 invasion not as an act of imperial ambition, but as a preemptive strike against its own domestic collapse. Facing compounding internal liabilities and the mathematical certainty of a future fiscal crisis, the state required a massive, externalizing event. An unpopular war serves a dual function. It provides a powerful rallying mechanism to consolidate political control and initiates a war economy that masks underlying insolvency. The calculated kinetic cost was deemed lower than the cost of a systemic political and financial breakdown. This financial weakness mandates a pivot to asymmetry. A state with a fractured treasury cannot afford a symmetric, attritional conflict against a peer competitor. Its leverage shifts. It must deploy low-cost kinetic accelerants to generate disproportionate strategic effects. It must leverage high-tech force multipliers such as electronic warfare assets, not to win the ground war, but to degrade the enemy's economic stability and force a negotiation before its own liquidity runs dry. The battlefield is merely a stage. The true target is the adversary's sovereign credit rating. The entire protocol is triggered by internal decay. As political actors systematically dismantle financial integrity, eroding central bank independence and guaranteeing a future fiscal crisis, they are not just mismanaging an economy. They are engineering a critical, strategic vulnerability. This pre-loaded liability turns the nation's balance sheet into the primary vector for attack. For an adversary, this is the blueprint. You don't need to defeat their army. You just need to trigger the solvency cascade they already set for themselves. The core equation of modern conflict has been broken. According to analysts at RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, the kinetic cost exchange is no longer symmetric. A $5 million main battle tank can now be operationally neutralized by a $500 FPV drone. This isn't a one-to-one kill, it is an economic kill. The objective is not obliteration, but asset denial, disabling the optics, the tracks, or the engine, rendering a multi-million-dollar platform a liability on the battlefield and a write-down on the national balance sheet. This is the democratization of violence. Lethal standoff capability is no longer the exclusive domain of nation-states with trillion-dollar defense budgets. Commercial technology has collapsed the cost of projecting force. An adversary doesn't need a peer-level Air Force or Navy. They need a shipping container of consumer electronics and a basic understanding of asymmetric leverage. For a global power facing a manufactured solvency crisis, this creates a catastrophic dilemma. The adversary's goal is not to win on the battlefield, but to accelerate the host nation's bankruptcy. Every destroyed asset is a direct drain on the treasury. This forces a zero-sum choice: absorb unsustainable financial losses and collapse internally, or escalate using higher-tier weapon systems, a launch-on-warning posture triggered not by an incoming missile, but by an intolerable balance sheet. The 21st century battlefield is not a physical location. It is a condition. The primary theater of operations is no longer a contested border. It is any sovereign entity with exploitable financial fragility. The legacy media points to conventional military friction, but the real conflict is staged in the gray zone, destabilized regions that function as proxy laboratories for a new class of weapon. These laboratories are selected for their low kinetic cost and high deniability. Here, adversaries test and refine asymmetric accelerants. Reports from outlets like the Middle East Monitor detail how localized, non-state violence can be used to stress a state's security apparatus and economy. This is not about conquest. It is about data collection. Every riot, every act of sabotage is a field test to measure the precise input required to trigger a systemic output. Analysts at institutions like CSIS have issued warnings regarding internal instability in Western-aligned nations. These are not isolated domestic issues. They are signals of gray zone staging. These regions become testing grounds for the full spectrum of asymmetric tools, from the low-cost kinetic accelerants to high-tech force multipliers, such as the electronic warfare systems South Korea is now developing to disrupt command and control networks. The objective is to perfect a blueprint for financial warfare. The internal political dismantling of central bank independence, a trend documented since the 1990s, creates the foundational liability. Projections from bodies like the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget confirm a future fiscal crisis is a mathematical certainty. The gray zone is where adversaries weaponize this certainty, rehearsing the exact exploit needed to turn a predictable liquidity crunch into a catastrophic solvency event. Therefore, the next Pearl Harbor will not target a naval fleet. It will be a targeted, systemic strike against sovereign solvency, launched from the shadows using protocols perfected in these proxy laboratories. The attack vector will be financial, not kinetic, designed to trigger a launch-on-warning response from a cornered power whose only remaining leverage is its arsenal. Financial weakness is the new tripwire. Launch-on-warning is not a strategy. It is a systemic protocol born of zero-sum logic. The doctrine mandates a full-scale retaliatory strike based purely on sensor data indicating an incoming attack, before kinetic impact. Its entire logic is predicated on the absolute integrity of that data. This creates the ultimate asymmetric liability. An adversary no longer needs nuclear parity. They require an effective cyber weapon. As analysts at CSIS have detailed, high-tech force multipliers like electronic warfare, source number 4, are designed for this exact purpose, to create a fog of digital war, a targeted cyber attack that blinds early warning radar forces an impossible choice. The commander in the bunker sees only a black screen. Is it a system glitch, or is it the prelude to a decapitation strike masked by a digital smokescreen? The protocol has no room for nuance. It defaults to the worst-case scenario because the cost of guessing wrong, waiting for a confirmation that never comes, is national extinction. This is the new trigger. It is not about winning a war, it is about forcing the opponent into a lose-lose scenario. The commander is compelled to launch on a ghost, transforming a digital signal into a kinetic reality. This is the mathematical certainty of asymmetric escalation. The first shot in the next war will not be kinetic. It will be a calibration shot against the financial system. Its purpose is to measure fragility. Adversaries no longer probe carrier groups, they probe clearing houses. The goal is to collect data on a target's systemic response time to a liquidity event, establishing a baseline for a future solvency attack. The vector will be asymmetric and deniable. State actors are investing billions into electronic warfare platforms designed to disrupt enemy networks. Source number 4. A similar, undeclared capability will be deployed not to jam air defense radar, but to trigger a cascading failure in a critical piece of civilian infrastructure. The result is an outage that appears as a complex technical accident, not a hostile act. The calibration forecast. Within the next 12 months, a critical submarine fiber optic cable landing station on the U.S. East Coast will experience an unexplained multi-hour outage. This will not be a simple cable cut. It will be a logic-level disruption, officially attributed to a solar flare or a cascading software update failure. It will temporarily sever a critical data artery for transatlantic financial transactions. The true target of this event is not the cable. It is the Federal Reserve. The disruption will be timed to inject maximum uncertainty into the market, testing the speed at which political pressure can force the central bank to bypass its independence protocols, source number 1, and offer emergency liquidity. The adversary is measuring the political will to sacrifice long-term solvency for short-term stability. This is the blueprint for triggering the guaranteed fiscal crisis, source number 3, on their timeline, not yours.